This
myself.
conference will now be
Next
recorded.
Sunday I can say that. I have all of Exodus before me. But before I get into the sermon that I want to deal with from the book of Exodus, this last Wednesday night we had another good discussion, brief because of other things, but a discussion about Joseph and Judah. There's really something about, they're the two that the firstborn promises went through. And 1 Chronicles 5, if you want to know the easy reference to all that, says that Reuben was the firstborn, but he did not get the birthright because of his life. He didn't deserve it. So the birthright went through Joseph. But Judah got the part about rulership, kingship, royalty. And how that in that wonderful story of the brothers coming back and forth down to Joseph to get bread, that Joseph kept extending that back and forth thing because he's trying to work out good for his family. But it was finally Judah that approached him. And it was Judah's plea with him that caused Joseph to reveal himself to his brothers and then bring their father down in Benjamin. And I haven't quite grabbed hold of it yet, but there's a reason why it was Judah with Joseph. They were the two key brothers in that event. But also, we talked briefly about Joseph married a daughter of a pagan priest of Egypt. And Judah, the bloodline of Christ, had married a Canaanite woman named Shua. They had 3 sons. 2 of them died. He tried to spare the 3rd son by not allowing Tamar to marry him, like custom was. And we know that story in Genesis 38. I mean, that's one of those ugly stories about Tamar and what she did to trap Judah because he had reneged on his responsibility, in her eyes at least, to give her his 3rd son as a husband. And the truth of the matter is, even though it was Judah of the bloodline of Christ, let's just say he was easily entrapped. And then she had 2 sons, Perez and Zerah. And bringing all this up because the thought is these are the 2 bloodline sons, the promised bloodline. And they both married pagan women. Not just pagan women, but almost the worst of the pagan women. A Canaanite and a daughter of the priest of the idol worship of Egypt. You don't get much worse than those 2. But there's something really deep in all of that that's important. That right from the start, with those 2 promised bloodline sons and their pagan wives, so that their children were mixed, in a sense, to a degree, that right from the start, God's purpose with the Gentiles was there. Right from the start, he brought the pagan Gentiles into the promises. We think of it as a New Testament thing. That's the purpose of the church, to bring the Gentiles into the promises. No, he had it embedded in the original stories of the nation of Israel. And if you think about it, all of the sons of Jacob married Gentile women. Who else was there besides their sisters? There was no nation of Israel. They could have married, I guess, some of their cousins. Maybe some of them ended up marrying their cousins along the line. But the oldest, Reuben, could not have been over 19 years old because Jacob was only up there with Laban for 20 years of the same family bloodline. And so probably none of the sons were already married when Jacob came back to the land of Canaan. So who else was there to marry? And maybe eventually some of them were older and had, but probably not enough time to marry their cousins. Gentiles were brought in mass, in all 12 sons, into the promised nation. God was trying to tell them something. I want this Gentile incorporation all along. Now they need to agree with the laws of Israel. They need to believe in the true God. They need to basically become Jews in essence. But they're welcome. And you need to be active in welcoming them. We've been reading the last several days. God told them right away out of Egypt, be kind to the strangers, the foreigners who come among you, because you were foreigners in a foreign land. So be kind to everyone you come across of other races and languages, cultures, because your desire is to win them to the true God. They had their own great commission all the way through the Old Testament. They failed in it about as much as we fail in it, so you can't be too hard on them. So right away, Gentiles were blended into God's plan of redemption. I don't know if you ever thought about it quite that way, but could it be any other way? Their wives were probably all Gentile women. Turn to Exodus 19. I love this chapter. Exodus 19 is a wonderful, wonderful chapter. If you look at it with spiritual eyes, if you look at it prophetically as it's intended to be looked at, Gary's doing a wonderful job of tying so many things to the first and second coming of Christ. That types and shadows and pictures and symbols of Christ are everywhere. And Exodus 19 is one of those chapters that the first and especially the second coming of Christ is all through this chapter. God coming down, God came down is the literal phrasing on Mount Sinai to Moses. When did he come down? At the sounding of the loud and long trumpet. Revelation 10, verse 6. Says, in the days, plural, of the sounding of the seventh trumpet. And then Revelation 11 goes into, at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of Christ. So language from Exodus 19 is brought directly into the book of Revelation. Exodus 19 talks about lightnings and thunders and loud voices and trumpets. Well, that's all through the book of Revelation. So something about what's happening in Exodus 19 is literal to that time, but extending off way into the future, both. Very prophetic. My sermon is called The Wedding Ceremony, the Proposal, and the Acceptance of the Proposal. That's what's going on in Exodus 19. God is proposing to the nation to become their husband. And the nation, even though they didn't understand it completely, agreed to the terms of the marriage contract. They're entering into a marriage relationship. Exodus 19 lays the groundwork, and then we're going to go to Exodus 24 to show the actual ceremony. That is full of language of the Apostle Paul and of the book of Revelation. I call Exodus 19, the more I read it and study it, every time I come back to it, I call it one of the pivotal Old Testament chapters. By pivotal, I mean, the whole Bible is inspired, but there are certain chapters that are so central to the understanding of the whole Bible that they become pivotal. And Exodus 19 is one of those chapters. It would be, at least on should be on everyone's short list. Say whatever it be, 10 or let's just say 10. What would be your 10 pivotal chapters of the Old Testament? I would put Exodus 19 on that short list. It is that important. It needs to be read and understood over and over again. I'm just going to read the first 8 verses for now, for time. But a couple of things I want you to notice as we read through this. This is the chapter where Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and receives the 10 Commandments. Jewish tradition, and I agree with it, it's easy to prove, I think, that the law was given on Mount Sinai on Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. The way we get there is simple. In the 3rd month, but someone might say, it doesn't say what day of the 3rd month. Yes, it really does. When you look at it from the Hebrew language that this was written in the 3rd month in English, but in Hebrew literally means at the new moon. Well, the new moon is always the first of the month. That's how they begin their new month, is the sighting of the new moon. And each of their months are 30 days. So this would be the first day of the 3rd month. Okay, Passover is the 14th, 15th of the 1st month, the middle of the 1st month. 15 days till the end, 30 days of the 2nd month, so you're up to 45 days. And we're going to read here, he says, be ready for the 3rd day. That brings you up to 48 days. But I think it's logical to understand that when they get there and start setting up their camps, that could well take a couple of days. Then you add wait now for the 3 days, that brings you up to the 50th day. Or the alternative is, as I hope you'll see with me as we read through these verses, the other thing I want you to notice is how many times does Moses go up and down Mount Sinai? I think most people who even know the Bible pretty well would say twice. Wants to get the 10 Commandments, then he breaks them because he's angry at the golden calf. Then he goes up again and gets the 2nd set. So I say 2 times. Some of the times are a little difficult to point out, but probably about 7 times. up and down that mountain. And it's easy to overlook if you don't read it carefully. And, I've told you that now that Jolene and I are trying most mornings to read it together, and one or the other's reading it out loud while the other one's reading it themselves, you pick up a lot more of the details that way. It's a really good system because it just seems like you notice more, either by reading it or hearing somebody read it, and at the same time you're reading it yourself. But it still surprises me how much you miss. We think we're reading the Bible carefully, but we're not always reading the Bible carefully. So in this story, we're going to find he's up and down the mountain in this chapter 3 times. So the alternate to get to the 50 days is that he says, be ready for the 3rd day. That's when Moses went up the first time. But by the time he went up the 3rd time to actually get the 10 Commandments, may have been a couple of days later after the 3 days. So those are 2 alternative ways, but either way gets us to the 50 days. And I think it's good to think that the law was given on Pentecost. One reason I like to think that is because while he's up getting the law, the people, Aaron, make the golden calf. And Moses comes down and is angry, throws the tablets down to show them they had already broken the law that he hadn't even brought to them yet. And the Levites stepped forward and said, we're here, God, what do you want us to do? And he said, I want you to start killing people. And they killed 3,000. And Jolene and I discussed, why did he stop at 3,000? They were all guilty. But maybe to God, that was enough to make the point. He didn't want to wipe them all out, but he wanted to make a powerful point. You kill 3,000 people, that's going to make a big impression. Or, as I told her, possibly there were 3,000 who God knew were kind of the ringleaders of it all. But 3,000. Connect that to the giving of the law on Pentecost. 3,000 are killed. Rebels. Then on the Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, God restores 3,000 converted Jews in his mercy and grace. He kills 3,000 rebels. He restores 3,000 consecrated ones who were the opposite of those he killed. Now that could give you ammunition for predestination. God limited it to 3,000 because he wanted to replace the 3,000. Exodus 19, the wedding ceremony, the proposal, and the acceptance. In the 3rd month, or at the new moon, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt on the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. Here's number 1. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Here's the proposal. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Romance. a choosing of who he wants to be his people, his bride. Now, therefore, here's the qualifications that you need to agree to be my wife. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. That's what a bride is. For all the earth is mine, but there's one special treasure above all people. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. That's royal priesthood in New Testament language. And a holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to the children of Israel. This is my desire for you, to bring you to myself as my bride. Do you accept my proposal? Are you willing to commit yourself to the requirements? So Moses comes down in verse 7. Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded. Here's the acceptance of the proposal. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. A group, I do. Will you? I do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. This is the second time up the mountain. You have to kind of read carefully. The Lord said to Moses, just reading another verse or two, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Lord, they said, I do. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today. There's that word. What synonyms would we use for consecrate? I really like consecrate. It's a first cousin word to sanctify, sanctification, set apart. Dedication is a good synonym. But I think I like devotion, because that's more of an emotional connection also, not just dedication, but a heart devotion. And consecration kind of captures all of those. So it's a really good word. Go to the people and consecrate them today, because they agreed to be my bride. Now they need to be set apart. We call it engagement today. And let them wash their clothes. Oh boy. Revelation 19 and 8, after verse 7, the marriage of the Lamb has come. His bride has made herself ready. And the bride was dressed in clean white, in white garments, clean and bright. That's what this is. They're getting their garments clean and bright. Because it's a marriage dress, a wedding dress. Do you think Paul, in his writings, and John in Revelation, they grew up Jewish in the synagogue all the time, and then they were taught by Jesus. Do you think they knew this story pretty well? Do you think it was in their mind when they were writing those things? Making that connection? So wash, not just wash yourself, wash your clothes. The idea of what is a bride to God? What is the bride of Christ? It's a people who have come through the blood, come through the water, traveling with God, and then washing themselves from the dirt of the world and having garments clean and bright. Isn't it wonderful when you start making the connections throughout the Bible like this? Doesn't it just make the whole Bible beautiful? And let them be ready for the third day. That's a whole other sermon that I love to preach. What was he proposing to them? What were they in Egypt? Slaves. I mean, isn't this the whole gospel story when it's extended to its fullest idea in the Bible? It's the song and the prayer of Hannah when Samuel was born. He takes the beggar from the ash heaps. Well, that's pretty good, doesn't it, on its own? Okay, took me from the ash heap and he kind of cleaned me up and he set me over here. No. He takes the beggar from the ash heap and makes him to be a prince, a ruler. From the lowest to the highest is God's plan. He doesn't do halfway measures. What were they in Egypt? Slaves. His plan for them is not just to deliver them from Egypt. That's a wonderful thing. When they stood on that far shore of the Red Sea and they saw the Red Sea close on the Egyptians, that had to be a wonderful feeling. We are now free. But God wasn't done there yet. He said, I don't want to just deliver you from Egypt. I want you to be my bride. That's hard for us to fathom, isn't it? That God wants to go all the way with blessings and promises and position. He doesn't want us to stop with, I'm so glad I'm saved, delivered from condemnation. That should always be the first thing we say. But I'm thankful that God continues to work in my life because He wants me to be part of the bride of Christ. And all of that, as Brother Carnes preached yesterday, all of that is what is involved in the death of Christ. He died for the sins of the whole world. He died so that all might believe. But in the same death, He was taking a bride out of His side with that water and blood that came forth. And Paul says that a couple of times in his writings, doesn't he? That he gave his life for his church. There's a lot more in chapter 19, many great, wonderful, prophetic kind of sermons. If you go down to verse 19, and when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder. So that long and loud trumpet, that is the seventh trumpet of Revelation. And so he told in verse 14, Moses went down the second time from the mountain. And then in verse 20, then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And then he tells him in verse 24, away, get down, and then come back up later. So at least 3 times in chapter 19, he's up and down. And that's without the second time he goes up to get the... Anyway, there's a few more times I won't get into today. I want to... Now, so this is all the setup for the proposal and the acceptance. Now go to chapter 24. Verse 1, now he said to Moses, come up to the Lord. Okay, here's another time. You and Aaron, this is not to get the second set of commandments. It's not yet. You and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, the 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. Then they repeat the acceptance of the proposal. And all the people answered with one voice. They were united in this. Said, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. I think they were sincere. But as we know, Moses was up getting the Ten Commandments. They were down breaking those Ten Commandments. And in essence, breaking their marriage vows. That's really what that story is all about. They were breaking their marriage vows. All the words which the Lord has said we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins. Half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. See, because this contract, this covenant, marriage contract, had to be sealed in blood. So it wasn't quite official yet. Then he took the book of the covenant, so that's the terms of the marriage contract, and read in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has said, we will do and be obedient. This is the initial, shall we say, do you agree to obey your husband? Part of the wedding ceremony, because the Lord was their husband. Of course, it should be included. All that the Lord has said, we will do and be obedient. And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made. So it's official now with you according to all these words. Keep your finger here. Actually, keep your finger in Exodus 32, the golden calf. I'm not going to really read much of that, but I do want to go to Hebrews chapter 9. And here is the Hebrew of the Hebrews, the Apostle Paul, who thought he had greater understanding of the Torah, the Old Testament, the writings of Moses especially. He thought he had better understanding of what we call the Old Testament more than any of his contemporaries. He said in one place, I was above all my contemporaries in my education. What was his education? The Old Testament. But he only thought he knew the most. It took 3 years alone in the desert with Christ as his teacher to reteach him the Bible that he thought he knew well. That's a scary thought, isn't it? When you think, maybe I need 3 years alone in the desert to be retaught what I think I know. Hebrews 9 and verse 16. Here's what the Hebrew of the Hebrews had to say about this with better understanding. 9:16. For where there is a testament, there must also be of necessity the death of the testator. There has to be the shedding of innocent blood. to make the contract official. For a testament is in force after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the testator lives. In other words, you can change your will while you're still alive, but whatever is in that will at your death becomes law. Therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. That's what we just read in Exodus 24. For when Moses has spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water. There's that blood and water idea again. Scarlet wool and hyssop, sprinkled both the book itself and all the people. So the book is sanctified as well. Saying, this is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you. Then likewise, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, and that's kind of where we're reading right now in our daily Bible readings. But Exodus 32, the story of the golden calf, is that they broke their marriage vows. At the same time, God was giving them their instructions. He says in Exodus 32, in verse 8, God speaking to Moses, it says in verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, go get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside, which is just another way of saying they've broken their marriage vows, quickly. How quickly? We've been discussing the fruit of the Spirit lately, and most of us have acknowledged how important they are, how helpful they are, but how quickly we violate them. Beware lest when you think you stand, you fall. So keeping the fruit of the Spirit is a matter of God's grace, not our effort. In 32 of Exodus, verse 19, as soon as he came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And we discussed this morning, why wasn't God angry with Moses for doing this? Were not these holy commandments on consecrated tablets? I mean, they were put into the Ark of the Covenant later. They were holy things. And Moses smashed them. And I think it's partly because God was angry with them like Moses was. And God wanted to show them in dramatic fashion that they had already broken the commandments. And so he allowed Moses to do this without being angry with Moses. Because that would make the point in a pretty powerful way. Verse 20, then he took the calf which they had made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder. He scattered it on the water and made the children of Israel drink it. We say, how could he make them drink with this stuff that you don't want in your body, in your mouth? How can you force someone to drink? Well, he may have had to wait a while till they got really, really thirsty. And then he said, this is all you got. Drink it or die. But I think what this is showing, the extremity, I mean, this sounds like an extreme measure, doesn't it, to do this? almost cruel in some degree, but God's trying to show them the extremity of their sin. I'm going to do something extreme to show how bad it was what you did. God does that from time to time to make a point. So now, there's a reason why in my preamble to my sermon, I talked about the marriage of the sons of Jacob to Gentile women, pagan women. Now let's get to the Gentiles. That's where we come in. Let's go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. I'm just about done. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. The Corinthian church was primarily Gentile, formerly pagan people, now set apart to be a holy people. But this church that was set apart to be a holy people was far from holy. They had a lot of sin in their church that needed to be cleaned up. And Paul did a wonderful job in this first letter to them to address, he waited till chapter 8? Now concerning the things of which you wrote me. They sent him a list of questions. But before he answered their questions, he had a lot of other things to deal with that he knew about them first. He said, now I'll get to your questions. So they needed a lot of help. And then the 2 Corinthians is so much different because they had repented. They had drastically changed to a much more consecrated church than what they were. Oh, that you would bear with me in a little folly, and indeed you do bear with me. For I am jealous for you with godly jealousy, for I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. He's trying to elevate the purpose of their calling, to let them see, I'm not just trying to bring you out of paganism and idolatry. I'm trying to prepare you to be married to Christ. I've often said through my ministry, it's the blood of Christ in our initial faith and repentance that forgives our sins and gets us cleaned up, gets our heart cleaned up. But it's the water that soon follows that's an engagement ring. I really think baptism can be seen as an engagement ring. You've saved me. I know you want to marry me someday. I'm going to agree to the terms of your marriage proposal in this public act of baptism, coming into your holy people, hoping to live a holy life to be part of that wonderful bride of Christ. It's an engagement ring. So we are engaged to Christ now, and when are we married? At that long and loud trumpet. But like Israel, like the Corinthian church was in danger of, and like several of those 7 churches of Asia were in danger of, in Revelation 2 and 3, we can break those marriage vows. John used language to Ephesus church of, you've lost your first love. But that's just another way of saying you're breaking your marriage vows and you're in real danger. To the Laodicean church, he said, you are lukewarm. I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. Jolene and I are getting ready to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. I like to tell these people older than me at the gym, one of them was saying the other day, He's been married 64 years, him and his wife. They're still alive. That's it's Neil. It's John Miller's good buddy. And Dick and Pat, they've been married 62 years. So I like to bring up that I'm only going to be married 50 years. It makes me feel like a young kid. It's a sad, sad thing to reach the end of a long marriage lukewarm toward each other. That's a sad thing, but there's a whole lot of marriages. They may never get divorced, but there's a whole lot of lukewarmness. What a way to end your life. We even fuss with each other once in a while just to keep life interesting. I think what God is saying to the Laodicean church, or what Jesus is saying to the Laodicean church, is, I want you to be my bride. Why are you lukewarm about that? Like you're not even interested. You don't care. That's the highest calling we can have. So we believe and we teach that we can lose that bridal position while still keeping our initial salvation. That generation, so if you remember the language of Exodus 19, they all spoke with one voice. But that entire generation at the golden calf, but even ongoing after that, proved that they were not, it kind of proved they were lukewarm toward those marriage vows. And that's why that whole generation died in the wilderness, did not enter into the promised land, which is kind of a way of saying they missed their bridal calling. They missed that opportunity. I want to close by reading some verses in Hebrews 3. You know, 2 John verse 8 says something like, be careful that well, it was real clear in my mind till I brought it up. Look to yourselves that we do not lose those things we worked for, but that we might receive a full reward. That's God's desire for us. Hebrews chapter 3 kind of sums this whole thing up. And it brings us into it, is why I want to read it. Hebrews 3, verse 7. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, when is today? Every day. Every day you wake up, it's today. That's kind of the idea here. Listen to his voice every day. Today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me. It was the opposite of what it's supposed to be. They tried me and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was angry with that generation. They all spoke with one voice, we will obey. But their actions proved the opposite. They always go astray in their hearts. In their heart, they have not known my ways, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. They broke God's heart. Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Because these Hebrew Christians, these Hebrew saved, baptized church people, were going back, some of them were going back under the law, under Judaism, and leaving the church. It's the whole purpose of the book. To keep them from departing from the living God, because they were going back to a system to where they couldn't serve God properly anymore. They needed to remain where they could serve God properly. But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, so every day, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Boy, is that one of the truest statements ever. The deceitfulness of sin. We get blinded, don't we? For we have become partakers of Christ if, the biggest little word in the Bible, if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. While it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? Saved, baptized people fell in the wilderness, at least in type. And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, one man said to Jesus. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear, lest any of you seem to have come short of it. They came short of it, didn't they? We can too. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them. Boy, there's that idea of James, of the engrafted word. They heard it, but it did not profit them, not being mixed with faith, and faith always produces obedience, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. Do you think it breaks God's heart when we spend our life sitting under the Word of God and it doesn't profit us anything? For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, God rested from the seventh day from all his works. And again in this place, they shall not enter my rest. He's quoting from the Old Testament, of course. Since therefore it remains that some must enter it, because God's going to make sure that some enter that rest. To those to whom it was first preached did not enter because of disobedience. Again, he designates a certain day, saying in David, today, after such a long time, as it has been said, the Hebrew writer loved to quote the Old Testament, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua, Jesus, the same name, Old and New Testament, had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day. There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. We call that the resurrection. We call that the millennial, the Sabbath rest for 1,000 years. And yet, whatever that is, can be entered into right now. Verse 10. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from him. How do you enter the rest of God now? You cease from your works, submit yourself to God, and let him work through you. It's an entirely two different things. Religion wrongly teaches people that doing good deeds by itself gains you favor with God. The Bible teaches that our good deeds are as worthless rags, and the only way that God will accept what we do is if we're doing it by faith in submission to Him, for His glory and not for ours. So the Bible is full. We could say the Bible starts in the Garden of Eden and ends in the New Jerusalem with a wedding. Jesus performed his first miracle at a wedding. The wedding theme in the Bible is really important, and all the way through, God's like keeps bringing this up. I want to marry a people, and I want you to be it. And here's the qualifications. And if you surrender to me, you can have it. But if you lack the faith and obedience, then you're going to miss out. It's pretty simple idea to grasp. But God's desire is that we obtain it. And I hope that's your desire. It starts with a moment of faith, a moment of surrender that gives you new life and a new path. And as you follow that new path, He adds more and more promises and blessings in this life and in eternity. I pray that we would all have that desire. I'm going to ask for a song of invitation. Let's all stand. Pray that you'll respond properly to the work of the Spirit on your heart.
$593.